I have been going to therapy for about a month now. In receiving therapy, I've been revisiting past experiences and finally leaving them to rest. One of the memories is from when I was about 8 years old. I was living in a rural area, my house facing a cemetery with more graves than the inhabitants of the town I lived in. It was a quiet, peaceful place, a place of serene silence. About 9 or 10 blocks from the north side of the cemetery was a secluded creek that led to a forest area. I had 2 very close friends. Sarah was my age and Daniel was 2 years older than us. Daniel had 2 cousins, one of whom was old enough to drive. One slow, hot Saturday afternoon, Danny's cousin suggested we go out, get ice cream, and drive up to the lake. We all got in the pickup truck, Danny and his younger cousin riding in the bed, Sarah and I in the back seat. We stopped at a small store, picking up ice cream, bottled water, and fruit. Ice cream in hand, windows rolled down, and classic rock from the radio had us hyped up for a swim. In the excitement, we made a wrong turn and found ourselves at a lesser-used path to the creek. The older cousin didn't feel like driving more, so we decided to take our things and wade our feet in the creek. We got out, and immediately I began to get this strange feeling. I could feel my hairs stand on end, slight discomfort washing over me. We began to walk the path, Danny chasing Sarah under the threat of putting a bug on her. I shook the feeling off, instead enjoying the crisp air and the sound of running water. After a good 7-minute walk, we reached a large rock where we settled our things and stepped into the creek. We splashed around, collecting rocks that shone brilliantly under the water, oblivious to the world. I decided to walk up the rock because I began to crave watermelon. I sat down and it hit me. The uncomfortable wave washed over me, an intense feeling that I could only describe as vulnerable. It was as if I was completely naked, being stripped of all forms of innocence and safety. I could feel eyes on my back, so I decided to turn around, fear-stricken. At first, I couldn't see anything. I couldn't tell why I had felt so paranoid. After looking for a while, I saw something shiny reflect light. It was brief and small, but I thought that maybe it was a littered bottle or a piece of trash. I could hear Dan calling for me to come back down. I rushed my way down and joined the group. I told the older cousin that I had spotted something weird, but that I was too scared to go check it out. He told me to ignore it. It was probably trash. But even with that, I still felt like something was wrong. We climbed back up to the rock, hydrating and eating between chats and giggles. The older cousin had his back to the creek where he had a clear view of the same area I looked into. I had nearly forgotten all about my feeling when he stopped. His smile was gone, face pale, placing his bottle down. He immediately got up and began to shout, "Who's there?" We all turned to look and saw someone shoot out of the weeds. It looked to be a man, and he ran with something in his hand. The cousin started saying that the man looked like he was taking pictures of us with one hand. All the blood drained from my head, the fear that I hadn't spotted the man first washing over me. How long had he been there? And had he been following us since we started walking in? We packed up and left, trying to forget the uncomfortable experience. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that the town was buzzing over, finding a dead body in the creek. We were friendly with the caretaker of the cemetery, which was the cemetery chosen for the burial of the dead body after he was identified. He told all of us that the victim was a teenager who had been killed and dumped at the creek a week before, leaving a disfigured, half-bloated, rotting mess. The murderer was a creepy middle-aged man who lived closer to the forest area. His cabin-like house was searched and they found toys, collected missing children's clippings from newspapers, and hundreds of pictures of families. which focused on the kids and teenagers that hung out there after school. Sometimes I shudder at the thought that it was very possible that that was the same guy who was at the creek, and that it could have been us. Creepy Creek guy, I hope to never meet you again. We moved a lot when I was a kid, but through high school I always used the same bus stop. It was about half a block away, where our quiet suburban street intersected with a slightly busier one. I was often there alone early in the morning. For the longest time, the most interesting thing that might happen was a raven scolding me from a tree, or a family of deer following me from the park across the street from my house to the bus stop through the fog, then passing me to walk into the forest preserve beyond the intersection. It was a quiet neighborhood and only a handful of cars might pass by while I waited for the bus. The deer stopped following me after the harassment began. One morning, a Jeep suddenly hit the brakes and slowed to a stop in front of me. The driver had all the windows rolled down, even though it was a chilly, wet autumn morning. It was one of those days where the mist clings to and saturates everything, and the clouds are so low in the sky that you feel like the world is just a big room that you're in. Because of the fog, they hadn't seen me until they were a few meters away, and their braking made a screeching sound. They stopped the car and the driver just sat there staring straight ahead. I couldn't make them out. They were wearing a light gray hooded sweatshirt and sunglasses. I didn't see anyone else in the car. After about 30 tense seconds, during which my bemusement gave way to concern that someone was going to hit this guy, who was stopped in the road, he finally turned to me, yelled a racial slur, smiled, and took off. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was newish to the area. I'm not great with faces, and I figured it was one of the kids at the high school trying to be edgy. Or maybe just a local jerk who had mistaken my ethnic background. Either way, I didn't think about it again until the next week when it happened again. This time, the guy had friends with him. The windows were tinted and they only cracked them so I couldn't see them. He yelled a different slur at me and I could hear their laughter as they drove off. This continued to happen, sometimes twice in a week, sometimes going months in between. They sounded young, so I continued to write it off as another weird local hazing ritual, but gradually it began to get under my skin. There were two things that bothered me about it. First, the slurs. They were ugly and hateful, and they sounded promisingly violent to me, even though I felt that they could tell that I wasn't Mexican or Asian or any of the other groups that they used slurs for. Second, their license plate was obscured every time. This was a very wealthy area I'm describing, and the local law enforcement wouldn't call out anyone who lived there on a violation, so I wasn't surprised that they got away with it. But it did give me pause. One morning, I was ready to yell back at them, but instead of yelling anything, they just swerved at my location on the sidewalk. I jumped out of the way and ran behind a fence, but the Jeep ended up whipping through where I had been standing before speeding off. I figured the kid had overshot and hadn't actually meant to hurt me, but some of the things that followed have since made me wonder. One morning, I came up to the bus stop and there was just blood all over the area where I usually stood. It was wet from the rain, but otherwise congealing, turning dark in places, but I knew what it was. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was off-putting. A few days later, there was a dead animal there, mangled and brutalized. It wasn't roadkill. I couldn't take my eyes off it, even after getting on the bus. It wasn't there when I returned in the afternoon. It wasn't an accident. I feel certain. It looked to me as though it had been stabbed repeatedly. Extreme overkill. I started to see the Jeep outside of the morning bus stop, but the windows were never down now and it always sped off when I looked at it. or I otherwise couldn't get to it before it left. This carried on for years. One day in the summer, I was walking through my neighborhood with a friend, and the Jeep came by at a very high speed, and an egg hit me in the chest. It flowed down my shirt and onto my pants, and all I could think to do was turn to my friend James and say, "You saw that, right?" Because until then, nobody else had ever witnessed the events, and my family members seemed skeptical when I mentioned it. I had to go home and change my clothes and take a shower, since the egg hit me at such high speed that it went into my hair and everywhere. It was then that I started to take this situation more seriously. I had a bruise for weeks. I started to catch a ride with my brother in the mornings, or wait behind the local NFL player's fence until I heard the bus coming down the street. I didn't ever go outside until I had text confirmation that my ride was there. If I heard a car coming on a walk, I would run off into the bushes. They swerved at me a few more times, and then I never saw them again. Some other strange things happened, and I've had stalkers since, but I've never been able to connect them to these events, nor figure out who the people in the Jeep were or where they lived. My parents have moved to a different part of the community now, but I'm still jumpy when I walk around in that area. Creepy Jeep psycho, whoever you are, let's never meet. I live in a managed complex that has 2 buildings. The main one has the lobby, mailroom, and amenities. The secondary one is where I currently live. On Sunday night, I had a DoorDash delivery dropped off. I always tell them they can leave my orders at the secondary entrance of my building, so I don't have to cross over to the main building, but I don't think they ever read the note. No worries. I read the notification from DoorDash and saw it was delivered to the lobby in the main building around 11 at night. I made my way over and noticed my dasher even left a note saying there was a suspicious man in the lobby, and that he was worried the man might take my food. I figured he said this because he was waiting until I got there. When I came down, there really was a guy sitting there on his phone but carefully watching my food. He saw me approaching and said, "You're here." I responded, "Thanks for waiting. Must be the DoorDasher." I picked up my order and started to turn around. He also got up, except he started heading in the direction of the elevators, not the exit. He started chatting. "I actually live in this building. My name is blank, and I live in building number blank. What's your name?" I gave him a fake name and cut the conversation short, the pieces coming together in my mind. This wasn't the DoorDasher. It was the suspicious man pretending to be the DoorDasher, who had even waited for me to come down as though he'd made the delivery. To get back to my building, the secondary one, you can either use the elevators in the main building to the 4th floor and transfer, or you can cut across the garage in the main building to the secondary building. I noticed the key fob in his hand and waited for him to click the elevator and step inside. When I gathered he was taking the elevator, and knew I definitely didn't want to share an elevator with him so he would know where I lived, I decided I would take the shortcut through the garage. It's a straight line and maybe a 2-minute walk to the other side. After he stepped in the elevator, I walked through both sets of doors and into the garage, my senses heightened. Halfway through, I decided to look behind me to verify I was alone, only to see his body in the doorway. He hadn't taken the elevator. He was following me. I booked it, heart racing through the garage doors. I started jamming the elevator buttons, hoping it would come quickly, but I could hear the elevator car was still on its way down. In a split second, I tried to think if I would be strong enough to hold down the door with the weight of my body if he came pushing through, but that would mean we would be stuck in this area in the garage with probably little to no cameras, witnesses, or cell service. I was running out of time. I eyed the stairwell and, carrying my food, booked it 2 steps at a time up 2 floors. I was now on the 4th floor, which is normally the floor you would transfer on to get to the other building. Although I was now in the secondary building, my building, I was worried if he indeed was still following me, he'd know which building I lived in. I needed to go back to the main building. If he was still behind me, I would know for sure he was following me, because we just did a circle. From the corner of my eye in the distance, I could see someone taking out their trash from the reflection of the door. At 11 at night, this was the first person I'd seen, and I needed to be next to anyone. I cut through the courtyard, through the conservatory, and into the hallway of the 4th floor in the main building. Just as I stopped to catch my breath, he burst through the conservatory doors and caught up to me, huffing and puffing. He accused me of stealing the DoorDash. He was yelling, got in my face, and told me I could be evicted and sent to prison. I couldn't look him in the eyes for longer than 3 seconds, but he looked bewildered. At this point, the person taking out their trash to the chute was nowhere to be seen, and this man kept coming closer, me backing up, him inching closer. I tried talking loudly, hoping if anything were to happen, the residents in the unit behind me could hear. He continued to raise his voice, claiming that the number 119 on the receipt stapled outside the bag was the real person's apartment number and that I had stolen it from them. Taking a look, 119 was in fact the order number, not the apartment number, but he was convinced it was someone's unit number. A lot of reasons made this logic not make sense, but it implied, even if I was taking someone else's order, I wasn't. He was going to follow me to my apartment to verify where I lived. He was able to catch up to me relatively quickly, considering I was sprinting and out of breath. This means he was deliberately following or chasing me down, which, circumstances aside, but especially for the rationale of stolen food, I'm not sure why a man would ever willingly chase a woman by herself at night, knowing how this would look. He was studying my order or receipt because you had to be in close proximity to see that the fading ink read 119. It was never about the order, because why did he pretend to go on the elevator in the beginning, only to chase me across 2 buildings for an order he didn't even know what apartment number I was going into? As I was standing there, him inching near me and poking the receipt, I thought I heard someone coming through the hallway in the distance. He clicked the elevator button, continuing his threats, and I didn't even wait for him to finish getting on the elevator. I sprinted through the conservatory, through the courtyard, and back to my building, taking the elevator up to my floor. I got to my apartment paralyzed and shaking from what I thought was the end that night. I was so terrified that my breathing got labored and raspy. I don't even have asthma, but I could barely catch my breath for minutes, grasping onto anything I could so that I could feel grounded and not choke from the lack of air. I'll never forget the moment I looked back in that garage and saw his body in the doorframe. I wrote a long, detailed email to my management with screenshots from DoorDash and exact accounts and locations of where everything happened, so they could corroborate my account with their camera footage. It's now been 4 days, and I'm awoken every morning by my heart racing, hot flashes, and paranoia with every drop of a sound. This is a new kind of anxiety I've never felt before. My days are clouded with fear of bumping into him in common spaces, how to plan my days with the highest likelihood of avoiding him, and how to strategically order and pick up my mail where I can know I won't have to see him. I don't know if these extreme symptoms, especially the heart racing, are normal after this experience, considering I know a lot of women have had more frightening, violent encounters with strangers that involve more than what happened to me that night. But this has been consuming me for the past few days. I feel unsafe in my own building. Here's everything that's happened since. The next morning, my management and maintenance came knocking on my door. Of course, I was already frazzled from the events of the night before. and although I opened the door, they could see I was visibly shaking. They came to apologize about the events, saying that they had seen the footage and it was scary. I needed to file a police report immediately. The property manager was kind, saying he would sit and call the police with me so that I wouldn't have to do it alone. I asked if they knew this resident and if they were aware. He said they knew who he was and that this wasn't the first time he had been reported for bothering a resident. My stomach sank. I quickly got ready and met the property manager downstairs, outside our building, but away from areas my property manager has known to have seen him hanging near, and we made the call together. After I gave my account, the property manager chimed in with his accounts of what happened. I was the 4th or 5th female that he has harassed. He has harassed women in the complex before but never followed them at night. The property manager has managed multiple properties before, but he has never seen a resident following another resident like this before. He usually finds a woman by herself and kind of hones in on them. He does not approach men, and he doesn't approach women when they are with men. The people who live on his floor have complained numerous times that he harasses them, making it bothersome for them. He's been arrested before for harassing a woman. He's been sent to the hospital before for his mental health issues. He was most recently booked and released 2 weeks ago, and management wasn't aware he was back. The responder on the other line noted this was quite severe, so they sent an officer on the scene to collect an official report. By this point, as we were talking, I learned the resident's full name, birthday, unit number, and when he moved in. It's been less than half a year, so assuming he has a 12-month lease, he still has a ways to go. The officer asked if I could remember if he had a tool or weapon in his hands, but I said I couldn't. I said there was camera footage, so couldn't we check and see if he did? But the officer said even if I couldn't remember and it turns out the perpetrator did in fact have a weapon, I cannot go back on my word and say there was a weapon or I felt threatened. I was stunned. I told the officer there's evidence of him following me, a woman alone, as well as threatening me across 2 buildings, one of which he had no business being in at 11 at night. The officer asked if he used the words, "I will kill you" or "I will shoot you." I said no, but he was still threatening me. The officer said unfortunately that qualifies as being a nuisance, but being a nuisance isn't against the law or grounds for arrest. My heart dropped. On top of that, my property manager said they've been trying to evict him, but there isn't enough evidence. Eviction is a long process. There was nothing they could do. The officer gave me his card with my case number, informing me that I should call him if he ever approached me again or if I felt unsafe. I went back to my apartment stunned and trying to figure out next steps. I decided not to leave my apartment again out of safety, but ordered additional self-defense items including an apartment doorbell camera. Because he had been up close to my receipt bag to know my order number, the receipt also had my name. I was worried he would put 2 and 2 together and type my name in the directory outside our building and figure out my unit number. I couldn't risk running into him again, so I had to stay locked up until my camera arrived. Given the information I had about him now, full name, birthday, and the fact that he has a prior record related to harassment, I decided to do my own research and find his public records. To my surprise, I learned that he actually has 6 court cases since 2018, and the most recent court record was from August 2024. His cases have been for stalking, harassment, restraining orders, multiple reissued anti-harassment protection orders, domestic violence, and attempts to get him to surrender his firearms, which he has refused. So he still owns his guns. Different women have attempted to serve him protection orders multiple times, but failed either because he's tried to dodge it, never showed up to court, or he's been hard to get a hold of. I couldn't believe it. This man was able to freely move about common spaces in our complex, and management has never mentioned anything to residents nor regarded our safety. Now, I knew this was more than just an annoying neighbor, but rather someone who could be dangerous. I was dealing with a man with unresolved mental health issues, who may still be in possession of his multiple firearms, who is angry with me. Given his history of professional stalking, I was worried if he saw me too soon again, he would remember our encounter and fixate on me and possibly escalate. A few days passed and I hadn't left my building, but I noted that my camera had arrived, so I was trying to arrange for how I could go to the mailroom, which is in the building he lives in and on the floor he's on. I asked management for footage of our encounter, and after 2 days of dragging on the request, it seemed like they were trying to buy time. They finally sent me clips of our encounters in different areas. In one of the videos, you could see he followed me into the garage a bit after I had already gone in after he had supposedly pretended to take the elevator. In the clip that freaks me out the most, you could see me enter the garage elevator lobby, click the elevator button, frantically pace back and forth and try leaning my body against the door before I realize I'm running out of time and run through the stairwell. A few moments later, you see him come in, look at the pressed elevator button, but no one took it. Then deduce I must have taken the stairwell before following suit. If anything, this showed intent. Oddly enough, the footage when he caught up to me and poked the receipt on my bag was missing, but management sent the footage after when I run back to my building. Anyway, a few days later, around 6 in the evening, I was figuring out how to pick up my mail. I have a married friend who lives in his building 3 floors above, and had no idea about any of this, so I asked if she would be comfortable meeting me on the 4th floor of her building. Deep breaths. I got to the end of my hallway, my friend on the phone the whole time, and opened the door to the courtyard. Hyper-vigilantly, I looked across to the conservatory and saw a man there. I squinted. It couldn't be. It was indeed him standing in the conservatory. He locked eyes with me, started mouthing things, smiling, then yelling. I began shaking, uncontrollably crying, and quickly ran back into my building. Now he knew for sure I lived in the 2nd building. My friend was in the hallway behind him, so she witnessed everything as he was yelling and directing it at me. She wasn't with her husband either, but he had locked eyes with me and was angry now. There were some people in the hallway frantically asking if I was okay, but I couldn't speak. My friend, still on the line, told me to go back to my apartment and that she would meet me there with her husband. My friend and her husband came up a few moments later, staying with me as I frantically packed a go bag. We decided it wasn't safe for me to be alone in my apartment, so I reached out to another friend who lives elsewhere in the city and said I could crash at her place. My friend and her husband escorted me through the hallway, me physically breaking down as we neared the elevators, but eventually leading me to my other friend's car. As I write this, I am in the living room of her apartment for the 3rd day, figuring out my next moves. On my first day at my friend's house, I wrote management an email again explaining the incident with the resident again. This is my 2nd day and no response from them still. My friend went to management with her husband to report the incident since she also witnessed him yelling, so it could add to their complaints. She said management was aware of me and my complaints, but they cannot do anything because he is protected under the Fair Housing Act. Management cannot deny housing to someone due to their disability, which includes mental illness. For context, most buildings in my city have MFTE units, basically reduced rent apartments that are reserved as part of an affordable housing program in my city. From what I understand, people can qualify for MFTE housing based on income, and sometimes it's combined with disability protections, which is likely how he's able to stay here. So it seems my unit is worried if they evict him, he might be able to sue for discriminatory eviction. I don't have a male partner, which seems to be the only deterrent from the resident. So my sister and her husband are trying to figure out when they can fly in and help me pack my place so I can get out of here. I'm devastated because it's a beautiful complex with incredible amenities, gorgeous interior, and pretty new. But all this means nothing when my safety is at risk. I have no plans, but I cannot go back to my unit until I have protection at all times in that building.